And now there is no music stand. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That'll be my story, how it's my nemesis. Okay. I am excited about tonight. I'm excited about all the nights. But I'm especially excited about tonight because this is my stuff. This is stuff I wrote. This is the last chapter in my dissertation that I wrote. And I wrote on women's experience of migration and the book of Ruth. And so I did a bunch of migration research. What is it like for people when they, well, actually more specifically, what is it like for women when they immigrate, when they migrate, whether it be by choice or if there's forced migration or whatever. What is it like for them? And I kind of came up with some themes. And then I read the book of Ruth with two groups of women. We met for 4 weeks and read a chapter a week and became friends, and I brought them tea. I had like a traveling tea set, and I baked them stuff, and at the end we had a potluck, and it was awesome. It was wonderful. So and then I took all of that migration research and then what my friends saw in the book of Ruth as immigrant women, because they saw things that I didn't see. And then I took that back to the text and kind of teased some things out. And not many people who have finished a dissertation can say this, but I don't hate my dissertation. Sometimes you spend that much time with it, you're like, oh yeah, that's done. No, I don't want to look at that for a long time. So yeah, I still like mine. So let's go ahead and, well, more specifically, within the book of Ruth, we're going to read through Ruth chapter 3. Ruth chapter 3 is very mysterious. Nobody knows a lot. Well, I know a lot, but there's some question about what exactly happens on the threshing floor and all of that. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, let's talk about the migration studies. Oh, wait. Do I have, what PowerPoints did I have? Ah, there we go. Thus far, we have defined marginalized people. We have read scripture listening to women. We have listened to African American women. We have listened to immigrant voices. And tonight, more specifically, immigrant women. So back to women. In my migration studies, there was this article that had this amazing title, and it was En el Norte la Mujer Manda, which means in the North, the women give the orders. And that is a reflection about what happens. The family changes. Once the woman migrates, the wife migrates to the North, she becomes the boss, where before she did not. Things were much more patriarchal, but as she moved to a different culture and had to take on some extra things, things changed within the family. So the first thing that influences things is economic opportunities for women outside the home. After a woman immigrates, it's typically necessary for her to get a job to support the family in addition to the husband's income. And that, if you haven't had a job before and now you have a job and you're bringing money into the family, that gives you a sense of accomplishment. I'm contributing to the family. You have a little bit more pride, and and that affects life within the family. Second factor is the extent that the immigrant husbands help with housework after migrating. That is really interesting, including cleaning, cooking, childcare, and financial decisions for the family. So work that has typically been or previously been thought to be female work, how much does he engage in that? And so that affects how much the family changes. And the third factor is migration often necessitates changes in men's behavior. From doing housework they wouldn't have considered for, to adjusting their behavior in public and private so as not to get into trouble with the law, and even taking into consideration their wife's decisions now on financial decisions. And so as the women contribute to the family expenses, that is taken into consideration a little bit more. So things change within the family after she migrates. And so the method that I use, I've already talked about it a little bit, is called contextual Bible study. Anybody know Dr. Kip Lines? Dr. Kip Lines. He's my friend, and he first told me about contextual Bible study. We were in the cafeteria, I have a very clear memory of it, and he's like, you need to look at this, because I was interested in reading with, and I didn't know that there was already a method. And then I promptly forgot about it. And then I came up with it later. I was like, Kip, you wouldn't believe this amazing thing I just found. He's like, yeah, I told you about it about 3 months ago. So now I give him props. He told me about it. So what it is a group of people invite a scholar to come read with them. The scholar brings their expertise to help them dig into the passage and understand what's going on with the literary stuff and with the exegesis and everything. But the people then bring their experience, and then they engage with it. So it's not just about all the knowledge-y stuff, but it's also about engaging with one's experience. And so then new insights are found when those are all brought together. And so, like I said, I read with 2 different groups of women from 2 different nonprofits in my area, and it was really, really fun. I wish you could have been there. And so the ladies told me that family life did change. I'm going to read you some of their comments about how life changed when they migrated. So I said, do you take care of things in the house differently here than you would have? You know, have more responsibilities? Do you have more say in the financial decisions than you did before, just as an example? And Ara said, in my case, I've been alone for 9 years because my husband left. When he was here, he provided everything. When he went, I didn't know how to write a check or work. I just stayed home and took care of my kids. I was pregnant. It was really difficult. I had to go to work. I had to leave my kids with somebody else. But God is great, and so I'm here. Isn't that great? God is great, and so I'm here. I had to do both roles of father and mother. So thanks to God, I have 3 beautiful boys. They've grown up in their early 20s now. God has done wonderful things, but it was difficult, but not impossible. Then I said, in my studies, I've read that women take on additional burdens they didn't think they would have to before migrating. And Inez said, when you don't have your husband with you, it's what you have to do. You do things that before you never did. In my case, it's made me stronger. It's difficult, but with the help of God, I continue on. And so many of the women that I read with found themselves having to work and taking care of an entire family at the same time. Sometimes because their husbands were injured or other things that happened, very dramatic things happened. But they did it. They persevered and they took care of their families. We talked about how husbands' behaviors changed, which is interesting. The women from my Safe Harbor group described how their home lives were different in the U.S. than they would have been if they'd stayed in their country of origin. Yazbeth said that in Mexico, her husband was much more involved in the activities of the family, but now he's consumed by work. All the everyday decisions about the family fall to her now by default. So he's busy, and she has the burden of making all the decisions for the family. Alita said that she and her husband are closer, and they depend on each other more. They were kind of in trouble with their family when they left. And her husband didn't want her to work. He wanted her to stay home because his mother works a lot, and he didn't want that to affect their family life. But she still really wanted to work, and so they made a compromise. She decided she would make food in the home and then get up early and go sell it at a certain spot near the park. And so she did that every morning. She made tamales and all sorts of good things, and then she went and sold them every morning. And she had regular customers that came and bought them from her. For Maria G., the new environment in the U.S. Caused her husband to change. In Mexico, her husband would regularly go out drinking and not think twice about driving. And because drinking and driving is illegal here, yay, he didn't do it because he didn't want to get caught and he didn't want to get deported. Or even just severely punished. He doesn't, he doesn't go out as much to drink, and he definitely does not drive while drinking. He doesn't go out because he doesn't go out as much as he did in Mexico. They have a lot more time at home together as a family. She said that if they had not come to the U.S. and he hadn't changed his behavior like this, they probably would have gotten divorced by now. So coming saved their marriage. Both Leda and Anzarena had been married for almost 50 years. It was really fun having women who had been married that long in the group. Their marriages were traditional in their countries of origin, which carried over somewhat in their life in the U.S. Anzarena described her marriage as very traditional. She cared for the children and the home, and her husband worked as a manager or a vice president in a bank. And his work kept him very busy. But her husband said, so she stayed home, did the typical stuff, but he worked. But her husband said, this is a place for reformed husbands. It made him appreciate her more because they weren't near their extended family. And so he made sure to pay attention to her. He made sure to take her out, and she talked about how he would take her out to nice dinners and stuff like that. So this is a place for reformed husbands. I like that a lot. In Cuba, Leda was a stay-at-home mom. She cared for the house and her children and her husband, but once they moved to the U.S., she had to get a job too. And so they both worked binding books. So they worked together at a place binding books. And so they were working 8-hour days, and then they're coming home. And she said, after working 8 to 10 hours a day, I then realized that I still have to get home and do all the housework and all of that stuff. And I finally came up with a solution. I asked my husband, how about we make a plan and I do the dishes one night and then you do the dishes the next night? And he said, great. And then he went and bought me a dishwasher the next day. Problem solved. So, oh yeah, we laughed at that one. That was great. So these women often had to work. Sometimes they, wait, hold on. What does my next slide say? Yes, okay. So the women, when they're working in the U.S., Marielle began working in the U.S., and it gave her a lot more independence because it gave her confidence. Even in the U.S., she began taking care of things that her husband took care of at home. Like, she was really proud that she took care of all of their immigration paperwork. They'd become citizens, and she was the one who had taken care of that. And she was like, and I did that at home. He would have had to do that, or he would have wanted to do that, but here I wanted to do it. And my mom asked me, why would you want to do that? That's supposed to be a man's job. And she said, why wouldn't I do it? So she did it. So she was really proud of that. Maria East also said that it gave her a lot more confidence and independence to be out and working. Constanza had this interesting discussion with her. Her husband was worried that it would change the family. She said, for example, if I say I want to go work at a factory, my husband might say, why do you want to go work at the factory? Why do you want to be with those people? What happens when a woman hasn't worked and then she starts to work is she has more power. And so that's what may happen. It may begin to happen at home. He doesn't tell me I'm beautiful, and he's not giving me attention. And then you go to work, and somebody else gives you the attention, and the marriage is lost. That was her husband's worry. And then my friend asked, does that happen a lot? And Constanza said, it happens a lot here. In Mexico, you don't make as much an hour as you might here. Even without wanting it, the woman has more power. Men lose because the woman might earn more and get more respect outside of the home than inside the home, even though it might be false. And then when the marriage fails, the woman might lose her self-esteem quickly. And then the husband will say, don't go to work. This is going to break up our marriage. It appears that her husband didn't want to work. And I told him, I was here a year without you. I was single, and I wasn't with anybody, and I didn't cheat on you. So she told him off and said, look at here, buddy. Look at who I am. So on the whole, reading with these women supported what was found in the migration research. While not all the readers had to work, women who worked did so because their salaries were essential to the support of their family. Those who worked did feel empowered by working outside the home. Many of the husbands did help with work around the house, but not all of them. Many of these women who worked also felt that they now played a part in the financial decisions of their family. I'm earning the money, I get to have a say in how it's spent. And then the husbands often were much better behaved when they came to the US. And while these trends, these are more like trends, these are not uniform for all immigrants, but this is what happened in these two groups. And so I want to take these ideas that men and women, they shift in their behaviors when they migrate, and bring that to the book of Ruth. Because she has to go out and she has to work. And what does that do for her self-confidence, well, she absolutely had to. They were going to die if she didn't. So what happens there? Let's see here. So the three things that we're going to look at is viewing Ruth as a woman's story, and then searching for women behind the text, and then identifying the reversals in the book's use of the betrothal journey story. Some of this is a little academic-y, so hang in there. But it's really fun, it really is, okay? So first, Ruth as a woman's story. First, a text that is a woman's story. There are three criteria. The first one is a text that describes concerns that are less than normally androcentric. An example would be cooperation between women rather than rivalry. We talked about that the other day. And so remember that, yeah, we talked about that. So who are these women competing over typically in these stories? You got Rachel and Leah. Who are they competing for? A man. They're competing for a man. And then Hannah and then Elkanah's other wife. They're competing over him, so it's always about him. And so he's the focus of the story, so it's a more androcentric story. Female-centered stories are more cooperative. We see the women working together to be able to keep things going. And so we also see a group of women in this story, the women of Bethlehem. The women of Bethlehem greet Naomi and Ruth as they come into town at the end of Ruth 1. The women of Bethlehem show up in Ruth 4, and they bless the child that is born. They name the child that is born. And so I envision that the women of Bethlehem were very helpful. They were a social network that they entered into when they came into Bethlehem, and they plugged in and the women took care of them. And because it's a group of women there, it's probably a women's story, the book of Ruth. The second reality is that reality is defined from a female perspective. And a key to that in a lot of Old Testament literature is the use of the phrase mother's house. Women will say the phrase mother's house if they're talking about their home, where they've come from. Men will say father's house. So if a character says mother's house and it's a woman, perhaps this is a woman's story. And what I mean by woman's story is a story that was told by women. Oral tradition. We have these stories that we tell. And it was probably, not everybody was literate. Not everybody knew how to read or write. And so these stories were told and passed down and passed down and passed down generation after generation. And the story of the Moabite, who were hated among the Israelites, the Moabite who marries in to the tribe of Judah, and then her grandson is David, that's a big story. That is a big soap opera waiting to happen. So of course that story is going to be passed down, and women are going to tell this story because Ruth is amazing. Ruth is a wonderful character. She's called a woman of valor. A Moabite is called a woman of valor. That is incredibly amazing. And so this story would have a lot of weight, and the women would tell it over and over and over and over. And by the time we get to the point where we need to start solidifying our scriptures, these stories, the priests and the scribes are bringing together these stories that they think are essential to the identity of Israel. And of course, the story of Ruth is going to be there. And so that's when it finally gets written down. It probably isn't written around David's time because it's told at a distance. You can tell there's a few Aramaic words in it, but the story has been passed down through the mouths of women until it's finally written down. And you can tell it's been written down by men because it starts with patriarchal concerns and it ends with patriarchal concerns. It starts with the story of Elimelech, and he takes his family and they move, and then they all die. And then the 3 women are left. And then it becomes a women's story. And then finally, Obed is born. And then the genealogy is tucked in at the end. And so it begins and it ends with patriarchal concerns. But in the middle, that's a lady's story. And I think that is pretty awesome. There are a few other places in the Old Testament where these women's stories have been captured and written down. And the witness of these women is so strong that they can't help but write it down. It is so essential to Israel's history and Israel's identity that they have to write it down. So that's how I think we got the book of Ruth. So reality is defined from the perspective of the female. Third, the differences between the perspectives of men and women are given. For example, there are 2 blessings in the book of Ruth. In chapter 4, after Boaz has gone, I should have made you read and given you homework to read Ruth 1 through 4. It's a quick read, it's really nice. Boaz goes and he earns Ruth the ability to marry her at the gate of the city. And so he's kind of done it a little sneakily. He's worked the system, is what he's done. And then they give a blessing. The men at the gate give a blessing. But they do it in the name of, I should have written it down. Well, they wish Boaz progeny. They wish him sons. And then later on in the chapter, the women of Bethlehem, they name Obed and they give a blessing to him, and they bless Naomi because, they recognize that she has been blessed because this son has been born. So all of these little things hint that this story is, the source of this story is from women's storytelling. And that there's a marriage in it. I mean, who doesn't like a good romantic comedy, ladies? I do say that I think Ruth is written to be enjoyable. It is written to be a lovely story that pulls at your heartstrings. You are supposed to be like, oh, why is she going there? Why is she going to the fields by herself? Can you believe that they walked all the way from Moab to Bethlehem by themselves? Oh my gosh, you're supposed to be worried about them. You're supposed to be engaged. And then when Ruth meets Boaz in the field, you're supposed to be like, oh, and he's paying attention to her. So I do think that it's supposed to be enjoyable. It is a good story like that. There are hints of women under the surface of the story as well. Tamara Eskenazi states, this narrator situates the action of the book in a penumbra of female presences. That's a lovely word. And so we have in Elimelech's family in the beginning, in chapter 1, they are called Ephrathites. That is not a tribe. That is a clan within a tribe, within the tribe of Judah. And it's Ephrathah, or the Ephrathites come from Ephrathath. Say that in front of a bunch of people. Ephrathath. And that's a region named after a woman. So he's an Ephrathite. Ephrathite. And so I just love that is named after a woman. The women of Bethlehem, we have them show up in chapter 1 and chapter 4, and they can be read as a counter group to the men at the gate in Ruth 4. Women's stories also, within this, echo of that of men in other parts of the Bible. Ruth echoes Abram or Abraham. She goes. She makes a commitment and she goes. She does not have the promise as backup. She just goes. So she is a type of Abraham. Naomi is a type of Job. She gets to Bethlehem and she sees the women of Bethlehem, and then she begins this lament. And she is mad at God. She holds God responsible for what has happened, and she has come back empty, and she is bitter. She says, "Call me Mara. I am not Naomi, which is sweet. I am bitter." She is angry. So she is a female Job. That's really super fun to me. Definitely, I think that hints at being a woman's story. And then there are shifts in the telling of the betrothal journey story. This is kind of like an archetype story. Like for Cinderella, there's a young woman. She is mistreated. She has to sleep by the fireplace. But there's a dance she is going to go to. But her ugly stepsisters, oh, they mess it up. They tromp on her prom dress. And then the fairy godmother shows up, or whatever it is in the rendition that you were watching. So we have these typical things that happen in the story. And so the story of Ruth is being told through this betrothal journey type scene or story. Alter describes its use as the author has rotated this betrothal journey 80 degrees on the axes of gender and geography. So things are switched around. Some other betrothal journey stories are Abraham's servant when he fetches Rebekah for Isaac, and then Jacob and Rachel are also. And so a man goes, he meets a woman at a well. Sound familiar? Yeah, the woman at the well story, the Samaritan woman, when Jesus meets her, that is a betrothal journey story. It kind of fits this type. One of my colleagues at Hope wrote his doctoral dissertation on that. So it's a very powerful form that we have. And we have gender-swapped stories. That's Cinderella, Cinderfella, that crazy Jerry Lewis. We have a female Thor now, well, at least for one movie, if anybody cares about Marvel stuff. Okay, good. I saw it, and I very much enjoyed it. So the genders are kind of swapped within the storytelling of the book of Ruth. And so when I read Ruth, I see Ruth as the groom, and I see Boaz as the bride. And then there are other roles that are gender swapped as well. And in the traditional ones, the man goes to a foreign land. Here, the Moabite comes to Judah, comes to Israel. So that's kind of fun. To set up the story is because we're going to work through Ruth 3. Ruth 1 is how Ruth came to be in Bethlehem from Moab. She selflessly goes with her widowed mother-in-law. Ruth 2, Ruth works to take care of them. Providence brings her to a field owned by Boaz, who puts her under his protection. She can glean grain and feed them for the time being, but they're going to need a long-term solution. This isn't going to last forever. So there is some urgency there that needs to be fixed. I already said that. I think in Ruth 2, there is some, she's really pretty. Oh, he's really nice to me, and he's handsome. Oh, goodness, I think they like each other. My interpretation, remember, interpretations, there can be many good interpretations. I think mine is one of many good interpretations. So, the betrothal journey type scene is on the screen now. The first 4 of them take place in Ruth 1 and 2. We have the groom-to-be travels to a foreign country, either in flight from or commissioned by his kin. So here Ruth volunteers to leave Moab and go to Bethlehem with Naomi. Number 2, he meets a young woman or young women at a well. Here there isn't a well, but in Ruth 2, Boaz says, the young men will draw water for you. So there's a well somewhere, and the young men are going to draw it rather than the women in the other stories. Number 3, someone draws water, the young men draw water. A gift is given or a service is performed that ingratiates the suitor and the woman with his or her family. And so that is Ruth providing for Naomi, coming to Bethlehem with her and taking care of her. So if you have your Bibles, actually I'm putting it on the screen, sorry. Ruth 3, I'm so excited. So the beginning of Ruth 3, Ruth has come back with grain, and they're all like, oh my gosh, Boaz, he's wonderful, he's their nearest relative, our kinsman redeemer, our Goel. And so there's a lot of hope at the end of chapter 2. So at the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi has been in this nearly catatonic state because of her grief. Remember, she's Mara, she's bitter. But what Ruth has done kind of awakens her. And so beginning of chapter 3, she's like, oh, I need to do something. So, we'll begin. Verse 1. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, I need to seek some security for you, so it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So it's the end of the harvest. She went out at the beginning of the harvest to begin gleaning, and Boaz has taken care of her, and she's been able to get a lot of grain, and has been accepted by the women out in the field, and everybody in the town is like, this Ruth is amazing. So they gossip about her, and that's why everybody thinks that she's amazing, because everybody's talking about her. And so Boaz is going to be winnowing out at the threshing floor. Remember the threshing sledge we talked about? They're going to be crushing the grain or the kernels to get to the grain. And so he's been out there doing that all day, and they will be kind of celebrating their work that night. There's going to be a meal, and it says that he's going to be quite contented with the food and drink, so there's probably some wine. And so she's going out there at that time. He's sleeping there because they want to guard the grain. They want to make sure nobody's going to take it. So he's going to be out there. What then? Now, wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. She said to her, all that you tell me, I will do. What in the world is Naomi telling her to do? What is she telling her to do? This is very much like some seduction scenes in other parts of the Old Testament. You have Lot and his daughters. He's been drinking. They take advantage of him. You have Tamar and Judah, the other Tamar and Judah, and so she dresses up as a prostitute in order to get a child by someone in his family so that she can live. And so there's that idea of the seduction scene. Is Naomi sending Ruth there to seduce Boaz? What is going on? You are supposed to be going, what is going on when you're reading this? Ruth is a wonderful woman of valor. What is she doing? And what is Boaz doing? Oh my gosh. You're supposed to be freaking out. Also here, we hit number 7, and number 7 is someone from the family returns to greet or invite the suitor. Nobody's really invited Ruth. I think Ruth invites herself. She's like, okay, I'm gonna go. You could say that Naomi is, because she's close, but I think that Ruth invites herself. She's done it all the way through the story. She invited herself to go with Naomi. She invited herself to go to the field. So that's another way that Ruth takes control. Let's see. It's interesting that she says, all that you tell me, I will do. So we're supposed to expect her to complete this plan. What will Boaz tell her to do, though? What is it? What's going to happen? Well, let's find out. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and he was in a contented mood, He was feeling very nice and warm. He went to lie down at the end of a heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. So she snuck in after he's fallen asleep, and she's uncovered his feet and then laid down. And it says at his feet, like is she laying at a tea with him? Is she laying beside him? There's lots of discussion about what exactly is happening there. But she's uncovered his feet. Feet is euphemistic for male genitalia. I'll just say that. So it could be that, it could be that she's pulled his robe way over. I don't think so, because this is an enjoyable story. So I think she has uncovered his feet so he'll wake up eventually. His feet are going to be cold, right? And so he's going to want to wake up. He will wake up. And so I think that's what's going on. At midnight, the man was startled because his feet were cold. And he turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. Oh my gosh. He said, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." Whew, there's a lot happening in that story right there, or in those few lines. So he's startled, he turns over, and then she is there, and he asks her, "Who are you?" He doesn't tell her what to do, which is interesting. Naomi has said, "Do whatever he tells you." But he doesn't. And so she tells him what she wants. Ruth takes the betrothal journey. No, she takes the temptation scene, the seduction scene, and turns it on its ear. She said, "Nope, none of this funny business tonight. I want to marry you." Essentially, that's what she's saying. I am Ruth, your servant, and the words she's used to describe herself have kind of gone up in status each time she's seen him. And she says, "Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." Spread your cloak over your servant is kind of some Hebrew imagery for she's proposing to him, saying, "I want to be your wife. I want your protection over me. And buddy, you have prayed that God protect me under his cloak, under his wing in chapter 2. So you be that protection." She's telling him that. And then you are next of kin. There is the whole levirate marriage thing where if a son dies, the next son has to sleep with the woman so that she has a son that takes the place of her dead husband. There's that whole thing kind of going on. There's levirate marriage imagery going on. There is land redemption imagery going on. And so there's a lot of law at play, a lot of Torah at play. And what they do in the book of Ruth is they push all of the law to they really push the envelope of it in order so that everybody comes out with the best outcome. Everything is great. Everybody works with compassion with each other when they work through these laws. And so, so there's a lot of Old Testament law stuff going on. And so Boaz, in verse 10, he says, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than your first. You have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor." So he's saying, what you're doing to me is nicer than what you've done for Naomi. So what does that say about Boaz? He's been lonely. He wants somebody to fill that role for him. And so her loyalty is better to him than it is for Naomi. So he's tickled. He's tickled pink that this is happening. "And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do all that you ask. For the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. You are a woman of valor, Eshet Hayel. And that is one of the highest things you can call someone. Boaz, earlier in chapter 1, has been called a man of valor. And that can either mean he's a really rich guy, he's a really great guy of great character, he's a great warrior. I think Boaz is all of that wrapped up in one nice package. He is a man of valor. So when this woman of valor and this man of valor meet in the dark on the threshing floor, what's going to happen? That's what we're supposed to be thinking about. Oh, what is going to happen? So she's a woman of valor. But now, though it is true that I am near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related. Oh no, there's an obstacle to their love. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good, let him do it. Not what I want to hear. If he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until morning. So in there we have, I skipped a couple. When Ruth says, I am Ruth, the suitor's identity is revealed. She is playing the suitor. She is playing the groom there. When she says, spread your cloak over me, there's a betrothal arranged, usually in connection with the meal, and Boaz has just had a lovely meal where he's feeling contented. And then he asks her to remain the night. There is a lot of debate over what happens, and there's a lot of innuendo in the Hebrew going on there. It's storytelling. It's entertaining storytelling. Will they or won't they? Oh my goodness. I don't think they do, because they're persons of valor and they're showing their character. But there is question of what's going on. And so she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another, so in the dusk. And he said, it must not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Your reputation, Ruth, we have to protect it. Then he said, bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it out. And so she did. She held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley. That's a lot of barley. And put it on her back. And then he went into the city. This is the only time he is said to touch her, when he puts it on her back. And then she came to her mother-in-law, who said, how did things go with you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. So she's including Naomi in the whole story. You're in this too, you get this too. And so she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So Naomi knows that knows Boaz's regard for Ruth. And she's like, it's okay. And I can just imagine Ruth pacing back and forth. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And Naomi, it's okay. We can trust him. He's going to be okay. It is also interesting that this is the only chapter where Ruth is not called a Moabite. She's specifically identified as a Moabite in chapters 1, 2, and 4. But here we have these intimate scenes between her and Naomi and her and Boaz. And to both of them, it doesn't matter. She is just Ruth. She is just this great gal who takes care of her family. So we have the marginalized woman and the best bachelor in town getting together. Woohoo! And this is a Cinderella story. Boaz eventually does have to jump through some hoops at the gate, but he does it, and then immediately the next day, he doesn't wait like, wait, maybe Tuesday. He's like, morning, I'm there, and he gets it all set up before everything gets set up. In fact, he sets up the whole court area. And so he gets it done that day. Okay, so, and then we have 10 and 11 happen, 10 and 11. The suitor returns, usually commissioned by the bride's kin, so Ruth returns with the grain for Naomi, and the suitor is received by his kin at the end of the journey. Ruth returns to Naomi. And then the last one, the suitor resides with his kin and sometimes begetting children. Ruth stays in Bethlehem and doesn't return to her kin, and she has a baby. So it does, see how things are kind of flipped with that whole betrothal journey? It's really very clever storytelling, very clever storytelling. And so we have some implications for interpretation. In a Bible dominated by stories and voices of men, the book of Ruth is bursting with women. Despite beginning and ending with patriarchal concerns, Ruth communicates the perspectives of women, and I love this so very much. That very text itself negotiates and weaves women's experience into the story of Israel. Women are tucked into the details. Additionally, the male characters are feminized versions. So the main characters are feminized versions of male figures in the Hebrew Bible. Naomi is a female Job, and then Ruth is a female Abraham. So the shifts between the genders highlighted in the betrothal journey are similar to the experiences of women today. They end up playing male roles a lot. They end up gaining some experience and some confidence and going out into the world and really taking it on, much like Ruth does. One can argue that Ruth also becomes the groom to Boaz by providence. God makes that happen. And there are two places where God acts in the book of Ruth. First, we can infer that Ruth happens upon a field. And so that is typically seen as kind of divine providence, God kind of nudging her to go that way. And then later on, God gives her conception. That's how it's typically stated in the Old Testament. God gives conception. Childbirth is always seen as a gift from God. Ruth may be the suitor, but she's still completing this role as a woman. She is full woman as she's doing this. She isn't wearing a tuxedo or anything. She is a woman moving around, and she still has the concerns and the worries and the dangers of being a woman, but she fulfills all of these parts to the role. Men's behavior changes in Ruth as well. Boaz, I gotta look at my notes for that. Boaz doesn't do the dishes or the laundry, but he is a figure who receives Ruth's proposition, that ends up in their marriage. He's also the one that takes the sandal in this little ceremony in chapter 4, and typically it would be the woman who would take the sandal. In a levirate marriage, if a man refused to marry that woman, his brother's wife, the woman could spit on the ground, or was it spit in his face? She could spit. And then take his sandal, and then that was to shame him because he wasn't doing his duty. But Boaz is the one that takes the sandal. That is super interesting. Boaz is also the character with the rival. He has the near kinsman. In the Hebrew, it's really fun. His name is Poloni Almoni. They call him Poloni Almoni. And I think that's just Hebrew's way of saying Joe Schmo. You got this Joe Schmo who shows up, and he is gullible. He is a gullible figure, so he is very much a Poloni Almoni. But Boaz is the one with the rival, not Ruth in this. All the women that Ruth encounters support and take care of her. As immigrant women most often work in their receiving, when immigrant women have economic opportunities outside the home, they typically gain confidence. And influence within the home. We see this with Ruth as well when she displayed courage and confidence. Perhaps it is this courage and confidence that made her immigrate in the first place and commit herself to Naomi. Ruth is confident in her decision to go and glean for their immediate needs. She forges a relationship that has potential for the long term with Boaz. Ruth acquiesces to Naomi's daring approach to gain Boaz. And she kind of seems passive. Everything that you say, I will do. But she takes that and turns it on its ear, and she tells him exactly what she wants. I want you to put your cloak over me. I want you to marry me. I want your protection, and we need to be together. When the plan is enacted, Ruth changes the course and tells Boaz what she wants rather than wait for him to tell her what to do. She takes the bull by the horns. And so, like my friends that I read with, Ruth loves her family. Her family now is just Naomi. But she loves that woman and takes care of her, sacrifices everything to come with her to a place where she is not going to be liked. They do not like Moabites, like I've said. So it is amazing that they call her a woman of valor. So Ruth loves her family. She functions in the role of provider for the family. She does a lot of things that the husband would, that a man would. She takes great risk to ensure their survival. She goes and she works in the fields, and Boaz says, I've told my men that they can't molest you. That's what the Hebrew says, that they can't molest you, that they can't touch you. So he is putting his protection over her. She's in a dangerous place when she goes to the fields, and Boaz protects her. And then she makes herself available to Boaz. That's a tricky place to go to a man who is asleep and who has a contented heart. But they both are people of valor, and they come together. And so we have a happy ending. Ruth is blessed by God. God gives her conception, and the people of Bethlehem, the men and the women, both bless her. And we know, and as we know, a Moabite woman becomes the grandmother of David, and she becomes a part of Jesus' lineage. She is right there in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew. Is it Matthew? I'm not a New Testament scholar. I think it's Matthew. And so this story is a beautiful legacy of this Moabite woman who gave up everything. And so when I think about what new things do I see or understand when I listen to Mexican immigrant women, when I had tea with them and really process through the story, what new things do I see? Did I put those? I didn't put those questions. For myself, I see this story as even more hopeful. And I'm even more hopeful for the women that I read with, because God showed up and he took care of her and enveloped her into the amazing family that eventually becomes Jesus. That is amazing. So I'm very hopeful for my friends. How does it affect how I see my neighbor? It makes me more aware of the sacrifices that they make, that my Mexican immigrant neighbors make, that these women that I read with, that became my friends, made to take care of their families. I appreciate it. And then what do I learn about the character of God by reading this way? He cares for ordinary things. He cares for ordinary people. This woman who just wants to take care of her family, who gives everything up. And that gives me hope. And that makes me thankful. Do you guys have any thoughts or observations?
Does God love the immigrants any more than our local residents?
I think God loves everyone equally. Yeah. I think he's extra concerned when the marginalized are hurt, but God loves everyone equally. I don't think there's anything you can do that makes God love you more. I don't think there's anything that you can do that makes God love you less. He loves everybody. Yes?
I can just imagine Ruth being David's grandmother, and maybe that's where he got such a strong faith from his grandmother.
Yeah.
He was one of the youngest, I think he was the youngest in the
Yeah,
family.
he was.
So you would imagine Ruth would take him under her arm and, teach him about God. It's great-grandmother.
Great-grandma. Yeah, we have Obed, and then Jesse, and then David.
Oh, that's right.
So, but hey, maybe they had really strong genes and she lasted a long time. But that'd be, and what's interesting is in David's story, when one of those times when Saul is chasing him around, he goes and he hides in Moab. So the family connections, or at least still kind of recognized, he knows he's protected when he goes to Moab because of Ruth. So, but yeah, that would be interesting. That's fun to imagine that she's lived that long and she knows David. I like that. Anything else? Thanks for walking through all this kind of academic-y stuff. The book of Ruth, go read it tonight. Have a nice time reading it. Enjoy it. Laugh when if it causes you to laugh. Some people can't read and laugh, but I laugh. But I've spent a lot of time with this text. So, but yeah, enjoy the book of Ruth. You're supposed to enjoy it. A lot of times scripture becomes, is this thing I have to read? And I'm going to read it so I can encounter God. But it is vibrant and it is amazing. All parts of it are written to engage us and get us to love God and to love his people. And so don't be afraid to laugh. Don't be afraid to cry. Don't be afraid to get angry, too, because there are texts that make us angry as well. Did you have anything else? Or just sitting? Okay. All right. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I thank you for the book of Ruth. I thank you for this woman who sacrificed so much to take care of her mother-in-law, her grieving mother-in-law, who she probably knew wouldn't make it all the way home if she didn't go with her. I thank you for Boaz, who sees her, thinks she's cute, and puts his protection over her. And I thank you that you bless their entire family, and in the end, bless the entire world. Thank you that you are a God who cares about ordinary things, who cares about ordinary people, who helps us and our friends to be able to make it through tough times and to make it out on the other side and to better our characters and better just who we are as people, Lord. I thank you for this opportunity to share about my dissertation. In your most holy name, amen. Thank you.